All right, everyone, welcome back to Messari's Unqualified Opinions. It's been a couple weeks, but we've got a monster lineup of interviews coming up. I'm very excited about today's to kick things off with Ryan Sean Adams, who's the creator of Bankless. One thing that we've been harping on quite a bit more recently is the lack of user education and onboarding for some of these DeFi applications in particular. And Ryan has created Bankless, which is a education tool platform potentially, but a series of newsletters that encourages new users to actually roll up their sleeves and start playing around with some of these applications. One of the top marketers, you could argue, in the ETH community, at least as nominated by Amin Soleimani from SpankChain, when they were thinking about how to incentivize better marketing for the Ethereum ecosystem. And I actually sort of agree with that because it is about onboarding user education and getting people to actually figure out that these aren't totally foreign objects and might not be as scary as look at first appearance. So before we do that, I want to thank Voyager, our sponsor for this podcast, and we will get going. So. And by the way, that's going to get cleaned up for the live or the podcast, and this whole part will be deleted. So for our live viewers, you're seeing how the sausage gets made. For the podcast listeners, you're never going to hear this. All right, so Ryan, why don't we get started? And I'd love to just learn a little bit more about your background, how you got down the rabbit hole, how you got to the point where you're studying DeFi applications and really, creating a master class of sorts for how users can come up to speed on the fast moving world that is the money Lego environment, as you and others have started to refer to this ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ryan. So I guess, my story isn't certainly anything special, I'd say. My background is tech entrepreneurship. I was part of a healthcare tech startup, sold that company. I was working in kind of the corporate industry for a while in healthcare. In 2013, I sort of stumbled across Bitcoin. Super interesting way, the idea of peer-to-peer money, the idea of a store of value apart from central banks really fascinated me. And then when Ethereum came on the scene in 2016, the idea of programmable money, so the idea of attaching if-then statements to money and creating an entire money system with these protocols on top of it, that just sealed the deal. I knew I had to jump into crypto. So I did that in 2017. I put some capital together with a couple of small private investors, and I started Mythos, which is a capital holding company. And the thesis there is investing in these new monetary systems, essentially. We don't trade, we kind of buy and hold for the long term, so we're not an LP or a hedge fund. We don't have kind of those quarterly obligations. And right now, our work is pretty simple because we basically believe there are two big candidates for money, and that is Bitcoin and ETH, and that's it. So it's not a lot we have to do. Mm-hmm. So what I decided to do just a couple of weeks ago is actually start kind of an educational program for folks that want to learn about the open finance ecosystem. I think we're in a position, this might sound ludicrous, but I wholeheartedly believe this, that we can onboard 1 billion people to crypto finance in the coming years, in the coming maybe decades. In order to do that, we need to educate people. We don't want them coming in on XRP, pipe dreams and, Tron marketing hype. So I wanted to provide some solid education for people who are just entering the space on what is actual crypto money, what attributes they should be looking at. So that's the base layer. And then ultimately how to use these crypto banks, which are exchanges and other things. And money protocols in order to accomplish a few things. The things that every money system needs to accomplish: lending, borrowing, staking, transacting, actually using the stuff as money, holding too, that's part of it, So Bankless is really a program, set up to do that, and I deliver it by newsletter 3 times a week.
And so you have just kicked this off a few weeks ago. You have the money cube, right? Is that what you call it? I think you just touched on it with kind of the evolution that people need to go through. But first step is just acquiring these assets, and then everything else is kind of adding layers of complexity on that. So how do you think about the foundational behaviors and how much time it should take to get people fully down the rabbit hole in a perfect world? Because it's hard for me to kind of go back and think about what it would be like relearning some of this, because
yes.
There just weren't as many tools available, number one, and number two, things moved a lot slower back in 2013, right? So how, I guess if this is successful, how fast could you get people from like 0 to 100, or what's the goal in terms of trajectory?
So I think the goal in terms of trajectory is constant leveling up. That's what I would call it. And so we've all, if you've been in this space for a long time, we've all gone down that path where we have to kind of continually level up. And the program is really set up to do that, to provide more information every single week, so that every single week the subscribers are leveling up. And you can start from basically nothing, not knowing about crypto, and just kind of gradually pick up more as you go along. My goal in this, though, is really to remove the distractions and get rid of all of the noise, because there's always a ton of noise. Even we're in the bear market, so it's less noisy than it was in 2017. But there's still so much noise, and people don't know how to kind of filter through the noise. So you mentioned the money cube. It's really kind of I call it the Bankless skill cube, and it's a framework for how you level up and how you can think about these crypto money systems, starting from my parents who know nothing about it and are like just getting into it. And the idea is there's a money layer at the bottom. So the thing you absolutely have to get right is you have to participate in the system by buying the right crypto monies, right? And so when I think of crypto money, it's things like Bitcoin, it's things like Ether. I know that's controversial, but those are the commodity monies that essentially back the reserve asset value of this entire space. It's also things like stable coins. And once you sort of get that money layer, then you can kind of move up the stack. The next layer in the stack is crypto banks. Those are exchanges. Those are institutions like Binance and Coinbase and BlockFi. And then there are these money protocols, what people refer to as DeFi. But these are basically banks only that operate as protocols. So that's the next layer of the stack. You've got money, and then you've got the crypto banks, and you've got the money protocols. In between, you need to learn a little bit about wallets and security and storage and that sort of thing. But then once you have that base, it enables you to start doing stuff with crypto money. We've been obsessed with Hold for a long time, and Hold is awesome. And that's kind of the base of this whole system. You have to hold the right crypto monies. I fully support Hold. But that's only one of the verbs in order to create a money system. If we don't get beyond Hold in crypto, we're just going to be, a bunch of gold bugs. That's not at least the vision I think crypto is moving towards, this whole open finance system. So the other verbs are borrowing, are lending, are staking, are transacting, are earning, are actually getting paid in this stuff. And once you get the money layer down, and once you get sort of the banking and protocol layer down, then you can start to do these verbs. And slowly over time, what I think is going to happen, if we're all right about this crypto experiment, is people are going to shift their net worth from the existing banking systems over to the crypto money systems. One day they'll wake up and realize, wow, I've got more net worth in Bitcoin and Ethereum than I have in Wells Fargo, right? Another day they'll wake up and they'll be like, I don't even need my Wells Fargo account anymore. I've got an ETH address. That's kind of the vision we're working towards, and my goal is to help people level up at all of those layers with the Bankless program.
You know, what I like about it, and maybe you'll disagree with this, but I kind of think that you're really just trying to educate the first, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 users to do this individually. And maybe at scale, people will behave like this. But I generally think, you talked about the banks being the second level, right? First it's hold, then it's the banks. It's interesting to hear you talk about the exchanges as if they're going to be the banks. I think it's really the wallets, because all of the things that you're trying to teach users to do, I would assume will be automated by the wallets, right? So Coinbase will stake on your behalf and they'll take a cut. Coinbase will lend on your behalf and they'll take a cut. They will use your Bitcoin or Ether if you give them permission and you're getting interest and income on it, to create stablecoins, right? And so it's not just them, but I would think with potentially every single wallet and every single service provider that's building on top of that wallet infrastructure, that most of this should be abstracted away. And this is more about finding the guinea pigs that are going to take the early risks and help prove out the security models of some of these applications before it actually becomes automated at the enterprise level and really gets rolled out to millions of users. If Coinbase was able to offer 5% interest to all of their holders, it's a totally different game that you're playing. If that interest is coming from USDC or stablecoin like DAI, now that would obviously get compressed over time. But to me, that feels like the whole ball game. If you can get people excited about a relatively safe way without doing their own custody of earning those type of returns. At what point does this stop becoming, for individual users and more almost co-marketing with some of the major wallets?
Yeah, I think you kind of talked about it well. And when you say wallet, so when I think of a wallet, it's the location where you place custody of your private keys, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so you could do that on a ledger, and then you are essentially the bank. You retain custody on a hardware wallet. But again, if you put it in a crypto bank like Coinbase, I guess you could call that a wallet. When they take centralized custody over it, I think of those as the crypto banks versus money protocols, where you sort of preserve your own custody at some level. So I guess to address your question, I think if that vision comes true, where Coinbase or like Binance or any of these crypto banks start providing these services of staking and lending and interest, I don't think it gets us there to the full vision. Okay, I think that's 50% of the way to the vision. And I think that's probably the place where I love Bitcoin, I love Bitcoiners, but where I probably have the most difference with them. There are two banking institutions that we actually have to disrupt if we want a parallel money system. The first, and Bitcoin gets this right, is the central banks, right? We have to disrupt that system. But the second, and I think Bitcoin falls short on this, the second is the commercial banks, essentially. So these are all of the private banks that are currently centralized. And the limitation, I think, of Bitcoin in some of the design decisions that it makes, not to scale its base chain, not to add programmability at the base level, what it will lead to is possibly a disruption of the central banks, but the installment of a new class of crypto banks. So the Binances and the Coinbases, etc., or even the JP Morgans, when they finally get into crypto, they start running the money system. And to me, that's 50% of the revolution. The other 50% of the revolution is we have no kings at the banking layer. We have protocols instead, and we disrupt that layer as well. And that's what that's the full open finance vision. That's what DeFi is doing. We can trust protocols for our money, as we do with Bitcoin and Ether, but then we can also trust protocols with our lending, as we might be able to do with Compound and Maker. And that's the full vision to me. And I hope we achieve the full vision. That's my hope. That's the full bankless vision. But bankless is both of those layers. Bankless from a central bank perspective, the people have their own self-sovereign store of value money. And then bankless from a commercial private banking perspective, where we can actually do these verbs without having to rely on Binance and Bitfinex. That makes sense?
It does. I do think that there are two totally separate concepts. The idea of bankless money, bankless commodity money, I don't think is controversial anymore. But when you start thinking about DeFi applications, lending, staking, and other more proactive activity outside of just holding, and traditional commercial banking activity, it gets a little trickier because these aren't risk-free returns, right? You're getting compensated for the risk of building and using some of these open finance protocols. But B, there's kind of systemic ecosystem risk if you can't cross the chasm and just get from the insular community of holders is basically just playing with themselves, and in many senses of the phrase, and then kind of users that actually would like to put some risk capital into the system in dollars or RMB or yen, and they just want to find yield, right? So they're happy taking the ecosystem risk, but they're not crypto folks specifically. And it seems, what I got excited about with Bankless is it seems like at least the first step in building a bridge to those people. I think the primary users of a program like this are probably going to be crypto, like actually hardcore crypto people that just want to follow some type of rubric because there's information overload and it's overwhelming. So there's value to curation. But the level up from that is probably individual users that are more risk tolerant that just want to find other avenues for yield.
I totally agree. So the intent of Bankless is to start onboarding that next level of users. If someone were to ask me, 6 months ago or a year ago, how do I get into crypto? I'm new, right? The answer is easy. You open a Coinbase account, right, and you start buying some crypto money, right? You avoid all the trash, but start buying some real crypto assets. And that's how you start. Just keep it on Coinbase, dollar cost average in, add a little each paycheck. That's easy. The exciting thing with open finance is we're actually starting to move beyond that with the advent of some of these new crypto wallets. In one of my editions last week, I talked about the Argent wallet, for instance. This is the first wallet I've seen, and it's a smart contract wallet based on Ethereum that my 8-year-old can use. Right? She can just fire it up. It doesn't require storing a seed phrase of any kind. You can just put some crypto in it. And you can start using protocols, no gas, you don't even have to know the concept. You can start using Maker, you can start using Compound, you can start, investing your crypto and lending it out in some of these applications. So I think people would be surprised how far open finance has progressed in the last, call it 6 to 12 months during this bear market when everybody's just paying attention to the price. Some of these tools are starting to get mainstream ready. And that's what's exciting for me about Bankless is I can actually recommend a non-custodial crypto wallet that my 8-year-old can use. That starts to indicate to me that we're ready to start onboarding the next tranche of users here. And it's going to be pretty exciting, I think, in the months to come.
I would agree with that. I think...
Hey, Ryan, you're muted on my side.
Yes. I'm doing that to control the echo here. So we're getting new mics and setups for the office. As you can see, we'll probably have some decorations in the background that are a little bit beyond the whiteboard that we have, which is really just blocking the other office in the WeWork. But it's also why there's a little bit of background noise that the Blockworks group guys will clean up, I'm sure. So let's talk a little bit about the Bitcoin versus ETH battles. I think for better and for worse, you've inserted yourselves as one of the few ETH is money warriors. Bitcoin has a global army that is intolerant, and that's kind of a good thing. And you and several others have gotten more vocal recently about Ether as money and kind of the importance to hammer home that narrative. There's two topics of conversation here. One is what happens when you can actually use DeFi applications with Bitcoin, and then there's a second conversation of what actually happens with Ethereum as all of these other smart contract platforms come live in the next 12 to 18 months, right? Because there are a lot that are going to be coming to market. So why don't we start, I think probably Bitcoin versus Ethereum. We should just position that as kind of the final boss that we talk about in this conversation. So let's talk about just Ethereum and the smart contract platform competition that it has. And whether maybe not any individual platform threatens Ether's reserve currency narrative, but if there's a cumulative impact that is just going to be relentless and net negative for Ethereum over the course of the next year to two as these platforms come live, and you start to actually see the competition ramp up.
Yeah, can I just say, so I am not worried at all about this new crop of ETH killers. And I know that's that's kind of counter narrative and contrary. People will say what you just said. It's like all of these smart contract platforms that promise higher volume and scalability and all sorts of bells and whistles. So I think the whole notion.
I do want to chime. It's not just scalability and bells and whistles. It's the combination of that and interoperable blockchains, which is something very new.
Yeah.
So the friction of moving from chain to chain, I think, is an order of magnitude less than maybe it was even a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So I think there's still a ton of friction for moving from chain to chain, right? So I'm, actually run validators in the Cosmos ecosystem, right? They're still working on some chain interoperability. I'm watching that space closely. But the whole narrative of the smart contract wars, I think, is a little distracting. I think that the war is and always has been the money system wars, right? And so it's about creating an entirely new open finance system. And at the base of that money system, there has to be a crypto native store of value. There has to be a crypto native reserve asset, right? So you can, if you don't have a crypto native reserve asset that's backed by a dedicated group of holders that basically believe in the meme of money, what you have to do is you have to import your store of value asset from another chain, right? That impacts your security. So all of these smart contract platforms are based on their security is derived from the base value of the reserve asset that backs their system. And so in order to maximize that security, in order to provide a programmable store of value like money Lego that open finance applications can use, your base asset has to be a store of value. So the big question to me when I look at and I survey the other smart contract platforms and Ethereum pillars is which of these are positioning themselves and their base asset to accrue a monetary premium. And to me, I haven't seen evidence that any of them really are. There are a few up and coming potentials, but doing things like having a private pre-sale with a bunch of VCs, and likely being designated as security, and then moving from a security to evolving to a utility. That's not helpful on the path to becoming a reserve, commodity money, base layer. So I'm not seeing a lot of competition competition actually in the space, even though there's this kind of this hubbub about the smart contract wars.
I'd agree with that for a couple of reasons, but then there's an important caveat. So maybe what I definitely agree with is you probably need a base layer asset that has a monetary premium to secure some of these other networks. I also think that the reason that is true for Ethereum isn't necessarily that it was early, but quite frankly, it's probably only true for Bitcoin and Ethereum because they both have, I think, a pretty compelling origin story and a bit of mysticism about their creators. Obviously Satoshi, but Lord Vitalik has become a meme, right? Because he is just one of the wonderkins of our generation, or at least is considered to be one by so many within the Ethereum community and smart contract community in general, and because it was the first token sale, there is a bit of mysticism just because of the outsized returns and everything that has been built around it. So call it a celebrity, whatever, but I think it was a compelling enough origin story that it kind of fits that bill of what you need for any sound money. The others are just very corporate, right? No matter who you're talking about, even the ones that have been in early, because they raised from private investors, because they have boards of directors, it just feels very different, right? From a monetary perspective. Now the caveat to that is a lot of people are going to buy the other tokens when they become liquid, right? A lot of people are going to buy Telegram's token. A lot of people are going to buy Polkadot's token, maybe Definity if they ever launch, and all these other couple $100 million protocol tokens that are going to get liquidity. And it's not so much that their market cap is going to reach Ethers anytime soon, but the cumulative buying pressure on the market is going to sop up some demand for Ether, I think, in other things equal. So if that happens, what does that mean for demand for Ether versus demand for Bitcoin as it becomes easier to use Bitcoin as a reserve for Ether? Because I could see a scenario where the course of the next couple of years, it's death by 1,000 cuts for Ethereum. You start to see Bitcoin, rally because there's a new macro group of users that get onboarded into the industry. Ethereum is stagnant because of all this other selling pressure and competition from all the other platforms coming live. And at the same time, there are solutions that make it easier to use Bitcoin for smart contracts, right? And so now what happens to Ether's monetary premium? Do people still believe that narrative, or do they become disillusioned and ultimately fall off because actually I can just use the real commodity money, which is Bitcoin? You don't hear people talking about the flipping anymore, right? Maybe that narrative will come back, but I've not heard that term in quite a while. So it at least seems like temporarily some hardcore Ethereans have been chastened by the bear market. My question is, does that narrative ever come back, or does it continue to kind of bleed and get attacked from both angles? One on the interoperability side, one from just the pressure of these competing platforms.
Yeah, so nothing I say is ever investment advice. But for all of the narratives, everything you just said makes, given kind of what I see, what Ether and Ethereum is actually doing, this makes it an incredible buying opportunity from my perspective. Right now, the sentiment in the market is Bitcoin is the only money, right? We've got 70% plus Bitcoin dominance index. Ether is going to be killed by all of these Ethereum killers. But when you look at what's going on with these money Legos, what's going on with Maker and Compound, and this entire system that's developing around Ether and Ethereum, and using Ether as collateral backing, essentially actually using Ether as money. Every time you spend DAI, you're using ETH as money because ETH backs DAI. DAI is essentially a promissory note. It's debt for Ether, right? miles ahead of everything else, and I see more. I see less actual dominance and more meme dominance, if that makes sense, in the Bitcoin space. So I think Ether right now is a dark horse because no one's thinking of it as an actual money. Everyone's thinking that ETH will be killed by some other killer. No one's thinking that ETH 2.0 will actually ship, and it's a really cool opportunity right now. And so I'm just in the trenches, like actually trying to help people use this stuff. All of the other smart contract platforms that you mentioned, the Definities of the world, when they come online, people are going to speculate on them. They always do. They're going to have days where they rise, 30, 40%, and days where they collapse, the same percentage. But can they actually use it? Can they actually take some of that, those Definity coins and put them in a smart contract and lend against that and mint a stable coin that's actually being used in the real world and that's completely trustless? No. But if I start to see signs of those types of things happening, if I start to see signs of, beyond speculation of the reserve asset of these smart contract platforms actually being used as money, as even Ether was used as a reserve asset in the ICO boom, then that starts to change my thesis a little bit. But yeah, in the end, I don't think Bitcoin is kind of the only thing we've created in this whole open finance money system. And I think ETH has a role to play. It's just, we're in the bare doldrums and people are underestimating it right now.
I think there's some merit to that. I should qualify again that I think it's it's not a when I talk about ETH losing its reserve status or its monetary premium, it's not just because there's all these risks, because you would argue, well, yes, they're priced in. I think my point is more that the competition from many of these other platforms keeps Ethereum and its growth as a monetary asset in check for the medium term. And if that happens while you see a rally in something like Bitcoin, then it's a vicious cycle where people are going to want less ETH as a monetary unit and more Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin will actually become a reserve for even some of the smart contract applications. It's a little bit of nuance, but I do think it's an important caveat because it's not just this amalgamation of risks that, it's totally oversold, everybody's overhyping all these things. It's kind of like the 1-2 punch, right? You can withstand the competition from Bitcoin because you've got all this developer interest and the money Lego narrative. You can withstand the sell side pressure or all of the buying interest that's going to come from the cumulative assets that are being released from these new platforms. But if one does that kind of accelerates the force or increase the force of like the right cross that comes behind the jab, So I think that's what, just from a simple supply and demand in terms of money flow standpoint, would still be concerning for me. But you could argue that's priced in, and maybe that's where the difference is.
I mean, I feel like that what you just articulated is what's played out over the past, call it 18 months. It's basically that. And the question is, I mean, you could still be right in some, time horizon. I would totally sign off on that. That it might continue to be the case in the short run. It might even continue to be the case in the medium run. But when we're talking about reserve asset, store of value commodities, once you get outside of Bitcoin and once you get outside of ETH, my question, I guess, on that thesis would be, where else do you go? Are you seriously gonna put your money in XRP? Are you gonna put it in Tron? Are you gonna it's so clear to me if you look at go to Messari, go to on-chain data FX, right? Look at the top 100 coins. Look at the top 15 coins. There's nothing in there that is competing as a commodity store of value that has any reasonable liquidity or any reasonable path to actually increasing that liquidity and becoming money. So if they're not doing it in Bitcoin and ETH, I don't know where they put it. And I'd be scared that they put it in a place that's that's not a good long-term store of value.
So maybe as one final question, we'll do a speed round in terms of the platforms that are going to come online in the next 12 to 18 months, and relatively speaking, where you assess the threat level. So let's think about maybe the top 5. So I would put in no order. Maybe you can rank order them. I'll name them. Polkadot, Dfinity, Telegram, Filecoin, and the fact that I'm blanking on a 5th. Maybe you can fill in the 5th and then rank order the 5. What else?
Maybe
what
Cosmos.
Else?
Let's throw Cosmos.
We'll throw Cosmos in there because
they're
yeah. Okay, so rank order those in terms of the value that might bleed into some of these competitive platforms.
I mean, I think so. So in the short run, I think value could bleed into all of those platforms, right? From Bitcoin, from ETH, whatever so-called alt season, could occur. But that would be all speculative value. If you're asking which of those platforms do I actually think is a medium to long-term ETH competitor, right? So let's take Polkadot. Challenge with Polkadot is it's a permission setup, right? You have to stake dots to actually kind of earn the right to start a chain, right? And it's permission. It's got on-chain governance. It doesn't have kind of the monetary policy and the tested monetary policy that Bitcoin does, or even that Ether does. I think it'll have a hard time graduating from dots becoming money. In fact, they're not even marketing dots as money in any way, shape, or form. It's a pure utility coin. And I do think that the founder, kind of Gavin, believes that. So I don't think that's a threat. Dfinity, my question there is will it ever ship? We'll believe that when I see it, but they're going kind of the cloud, where the decentralized AWS, right? It's again not even capturing themselves as a money system. Cosmos, atoms are not trying to be money. Right? They're trying to be basically tokenized ASICs. That's what they're doing. They're going to import their store of value from other blockchains. So they're going to put Bitcoin on Cosmos. That's going to be their store of value. But atoms are not competitive with ETH as a money. Now, maybe Bitcoin plus Cosmos is competitive as a money system with Ethereum, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Filecoin, completely different space, right? I mean, that's more of a commodity for storage. It's not actually trying to become a commodity money in any sense. So I don't view that as competitive.
It is if Ethereum kind of forfeits the whole Web3 thesis, right, and just focuses on financial applications.
So at some level, I kind of hope some aspects of the Web3 thesis, the decentralized internet thesis, are forfeited, right?
I would agree.
I've never really, that's not why I got into Bitcoin. It's not why I got into Ethereum. It was more for programmable money and self-sovereign money. But even so, I mean, Filecoin is basically IPFS, right? Economically incentivized IPFS, and that's a file storage layer, and it's more complementary to what Ethereum is doing in the Web3 space than competitive, in my view.
Well, a lot of this is just going to have to play out, and I'm sure in 6 months there will be things that we didn't think of that will crop up as either risks or big, massive new opportunities. But in the meantime, people can go to Substack Bankless.com and sign up for the newsletter. It's been great so far, and definitely excited to continue reading and following along. Any other parting words of wisdom?
No, that's great. So it's bankless.substack.com, and thanks a lot, Ryan. This has been really fun.
Thank you. All right. Until next time. Ciao.
All right, man.